investigators in Haifa and 5 in Hamburg. And as the title of the center is, we are looking at the rule of law under extreme conditions from a theoretical, empirical, comparative perspective. And of course, counterterrorism, belligerency is one of these extreme conditions. So this workshop is a very relevant happening in our calendar. And as I said, I'm very happy that this is the third workshop that we're conducting. I want to thank Ido for organizing this workshop, also to thank Michal. We have a very small staff, but very committed staff, and I hope that you all also stay in touch with the Minerva Center after the conclusion of this workshop, and on the basis of the experiences of the number of returning people, I hope that this is the case. As I said, I'm only greeting here. I'm not going to give a big lecture that those who heard me last year or a year before had enough probably. But I want to a little bit connect the theme of this workshop to the current events in recent years, and to the general theoretical framework of the Minerva Center. With regard to current event, we reported a year ago, 2 years ago, that terrorism is becoming a more significant problem worldwide. 2016, as you can see, was a record year of terror attacks worldwide, especially in Europe. Record year of fatalities in Europe. There is a small map of the concentration of terror attacks in 2016. And apparently since 2016, both 2017 and 2018, there was a drop in the level of terror activities, drop in the fatalities from terror activity. You see this drop, quite sharp drop in 2017 and approaching 2018. And the question is whether this decrease in the number of level of terror activities and its impact is due to good policies, good legislation, good preparation or better preparation of different government worldwide. I think this is a very interesting question in light of the discussions that we were going to have here. And of course the question was, at what price? In our perspective, counterterrorism policy, belligerency, and policies trying to combat belligerencies are connected directly to the very important notion of the rule of law that we think is one of the most important elements in the success of countries. Without getting into the political map, what exactly liberal democracy looks like, rule of law, democracy, and protection of human rights are all very important values in current political philosophy theory and implementation. And there are threats by the existence of extreme conditions from all kinds. We're talking about here security threats, but extreme conditions can occur as a result of natural disaster, as a result of economic meltdown. And the issue, the main focus of the center is to analyze both from normative perspective, political philosophy or legal theory, and empirically, comparatively, what happens, what should happen when extreme conditions occur, how does the rule of law has or is adjusting to it, and the question arises because in order to achieve the formal and substantive facets of the rule of law. Decision making cannot be swift. Decision making collective decision making has to be under deliberation or after deliberation, checks and balances. It's not only majority through legislation, legislator or government that has to decide. We want to, in order to achieve a real liberal democratic values, protection of human rights and protection of the rule of law, decision making and policy implementation are not adapted to extreme conditions. And what is quite interesting is, first of all, I think one of the questions that should be set for discussion here is really terrorism is extreme condition that justifies a change in the rule of law, reduction of the protection of human rights, reduction of criticism or judicial review on government actions or policies. Is this minor terror attack equivalent to a major war? Is a minor terror attack equivalent to a huge earthquake? So the border between extreme conditions and normality, also in normality we are facing irregular conditions. This is a very important question, I think, that we want to expand and discuss. A second important question is what is the right response of a good country, a good polity, to extreme conditions? As you can see here, extreme conditions are characterized by a magnitude of irregular condition, a real spread of the extreme condition, and it's imminent or actual, and therefore does not allow preparation of the polity unless the polity has prepared before. And this is, of course, one of the things that is important to talk about, preparation for or preparation or prevention of such extreme conditions, and when we talk about extreme conditions and the background of terrorism and belligerency. We, in our studies, distinguish between three basic types of model of polities struggling with various extreme conditions. The old goes back to the Roman Empire, but is practiced by, at least on paper, but many countries, is the emergency constitution model, according to which we have a rule of law, we have basic rules of decision making, we have substantive rules for normal time, and when there are extreme conditions, there is a switch in which we change decision making processes, for example, giving competence to executive to issue norms, which are usually in the competence of the legislator, or we bring into force legislation or regulation that are not usually in force. And after the end of the extreme condition, we switch back the rule of law to normality. This, as I said, characterized the Roman Republic. It characterizes many European countries in which you have a possibility to declare emergency, declaration which brings into existence various different decision-making processes and institutional structures. France declared emergency, for example, following the terrorism attack, and in France, declaration of emergency gives the President of the Republic unlimited powers to do whatever he thinks is necessary in order to mitigate the extreme condition. The US has a lot of declaration of emergencies, not only on the background of terrorism, but on other disasters. Again, it gives powers which do not exist under the regular constitutional structure. This is one model. A second model is stepping outside the law. Extreme condition, the most important thing is to mitigate the extreme condition, to save lives and so forth, so on. Disregard the law. We have this in practice in many countries and also in the international arena. If we talk about international law, Iraq, Yugoslavia were basically can characterized as stepping outside the rule of law. And we have a third model of changing regular legislation and bringing a new normality that incorporates the dangers and the threats that the history or the recent history is telling us, threats that can materialize. And I think that one of the things that also can be an interesting topic for discussion here is that we are seeing in recent years a shift from emergency constitution model to the business as usual model, i.e. various measures, various pieces of legislation which gives more authorities to the government or limits further the practice of human rights are not perceived anymore as part of an emergency situation, but as part of a new normality. And specifically in the area of counterterrorism, this is a phenomena that we see in many countries, including Israel. Israel had a very interesting structure of this switch, emergency constitution. Our counterterrorism law that was enacted in 1948 was only in force in time of emergency, as well as other measures. And in recent years, we are witnessing a shift from this emergency normality distinction to a new normality. The new Israeli counterterrorism law does not depend on emergency declaration. It is actually more moderate in terms of violation of human rights and authorities to the government, but it's still, of course, very different from normality, at least in theory, normality as prescribed by previous legal order. I was talking 1 year ago, about the distinction between the differences between comparison between France and Britain. In Britain, the business as usual model is the dominant model, new legislation which is in force permanently. In France, since the 2015-2016 attacks, the discourse was that we are under extreme conditions and we have an extreme condition constitution, various measures that are temporary. Emergency declaration was abolished in France last year, but with it, new legislation came into force, which actually drugs emergency into normality. And I think that this is an important phenomena that should be discussed, especially in the context of terrorism, which, as I said before, the first point is whether it is an extreme condition that justifies such a rare and a distinctive measure is a question to be asked. So I don't want to take more of Emanuela's time. This is her keynote address, but I think that some of these issues, and I know that not all of you are discussing these issues in the framework of what I just sketched here. This is one of the interesting main foci of the Minerva Center, and it would be great if some of you can give a thought to these preliminary remarks. I want to wish everyone very, very fruitful deliberations and also enjoyable time in Haifa. You are lucky with the weather. 2 weeks ago it was quite stormy, but apparently in the next few days at least it will be nice and sunny, and even I think Mediterranean possibility to dip in the water. So have a good time, and I'm again apologizing that I will not be with you during most of this workshop. Emanuela.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to welcome you.
It's a pleasure to be back here. I was saying it's a bit of a snowball effect. if you come once, you keep on coming, and the group of core people become bigger and bigger. You're going to need a bigger room. Thank you for your opening remarks, Eli. Before I turn to mine, I had a couple of reactions watching your slides. One was when you talked about the shift that some states are doing from exceptional measures to business as usual. I was wondering, what does this mean for the threats that some of these countermeasures, those counterterrorism measures pose for human rights law in particular? And you seem to suggest that as far as Israel was concerned, possibly it is an improvement of the situation. Possibly.
It's a mix.
It's a mix, exactly.
Yeah. On one hand, the legislation is more moderate than the previous legislation, or the measures are more moderate. On the other hand, they are permanent.
Right. And also there's questions of something that struck me as to what extent is it possible to challenge some of the measures before judicial bodies? How does that affect it? That was just an initial reaction. And then I think I felt that there was a fourth model which didn't appear, which is the we're at war model. And what does that mean domestically, but also extraterritorially? Because that's what we've seen in the US. And interestingly, France took a rather different approach. While in terms of rhetoric it might have said we're at war, it took a rather different approach in terms of regulatory framework. But absolutely fascinating. So this is the